having an argument with you, talking to you in a bad way? Or do I want to leave you in a good way, having said something nice, having said something positive, having maybe said something wise even as part of the suttas? How do I want to leave you? I know what I want. I don't want to die having just argued with someone. If I'm going to die, I want to die with a heart which is free, which is relieved of all the burdens of having done bad things, because bad things are burdens of the heart. This is why we have regrets in life. A regret is really a burden of the mind, a burden of the heart. And as long as you do bad things, guaranteed that you will have regrets. So the very simple thought of life is short. You never know when you're going to die. It could be tomorrow. It could be now. Yeah, you could die in the next moment. It's just impossible to know. And the more clarity you have about that, the more you realize now is the time to live well. Simple ideas with powerful consequences if you use them in the right way. Then the Buddha says, people grieve over belongings, yet there is no such thing as a permanent possession. Separation is a fact of life. When you see this, you wouldn't stay living at home. If you fully understand the impermanence of all the things in your life, all the things that you think are yours, your house, your car, your belongings, everything that you have, the things that you take to be most dear. I don't know, if you lost everything you owned, what is it that you would grieve the most over? What is it that you would not want to lose? That is the thing you are most attached to. Yeah. So if you fully understand the impermanence of this, what happens? What happens is you become a monk, you become a nun. That's what it says here. You wouldn't stay living at home. Yeah, you would become an ascetic if you really understood this. And the reason is because you understand that holding on to all of these possessions is impossible anyway. You have them for a while, then they are gone. They are never really yours in the first place. If they really were yours, you could hold on to them, but you can't. All of these things are like borrowed goods. One of the famous similes in the sutras is the simile of the borrowed goods. Yeah, everything in your life is borrowed. It is borrowed from nature. At the end of your life, you have to give it all back again. Yeah, can you remember that? Can you relate to your possessions as borrowed goods? If you can, your attachment is vastly decreased because you know you have it for a while. If something is borrowed, what is your attitude towards it? It's a different kind of attitude. Yeah, it's not an attitude of control. It's not an attitude, I'm going to have this forever. It's an attitude of, okay, I'm going to look after it a little bit. I'm not going to care too much because tomorrow I have to give it back again. So this is the idea of thinking of everything in your life as a borrowed good, something that you have to give back. And then, of course, your idea about what matters in the world starts to change. Yeah, because nothing is permanent. No possessions can really last. Well, what is the one possession that really can last? What is the thing that you really own? And of course, the Buddha says the one thing that we do own, we are the owners of our karma. And our karma, what is that? Well, our karma is just the effect that our actions have on our minds. Yeah. If you live well, if you live with good speech and kind actions, you start to feel brighter and more wholesome inside. That is your real possession. That is what it means by kamma vipaka, the building up of good qualities based on doing the good things in the world. That is your real possession. Because that is your real possession, that is where you should invest. That is what matters. So it's kind of awesome, yeah, how the Buddha sees this. If you really see this fully, there are no permanent possessions. And this, of course, includes also people in our life. They also are not permanent. The more you see that, the more powerful, the more attractive becomes the spiritual path, because that is where you build up those other qualities that actually are far more permanent, that you can take with you into the future life, maybe for many, many lives into the future. In the end, even your karma is not your possession. In the end, that too will fade away, but it's much, much, much more permanent than all the other things that we can have in this world. Separation is a fact of life. When you see this, you would never want to live in a home. Isn't that kind of amazing? It shows you how shallow our insight often is. We haven't really penetrated what is going on. If we had really penetrated it, we would have already left the household life. Whatever a person thinks of as belonging to them, that too is given up when they die. Knowing this, an astute follower of mine would not be interested in ownership. What's the point of owning stuff when it is not really yours in the first place? You know that it isn't yours, so there's no point in owning these things. If you own them, if you grasp them, all that happens is that you're asking for trouble in the future. Because in the future, when you have to give it up because you die, you're going to suffer because you're already attached to these things. So ownership is bad. If you think you own those things that cannot be owned, all you're doing is asking for suffering here. Just as upon waking up, a person does not see what they encountered in a dream, so too you do not see your loved ones when they are dead and gone. This is the idea of a dream again. This idea of a dream is something that you see in the suttas in a few places, yeah? And all your loved ones, all the people that are close to you, one day they will be like a dream. They are no longer there. It will be as if one day you wake up. Now this is the reality. What happened to all the people that I was close to? They're all gone. They're not there anymore. I may never see them again. Was it all just a dream? Was it real? All of those relationships that I had, all the people, all the ownership of the world? Or was it just a dream all along? And of course, the point is that it is real in one sense. It is real in the sense that something happened, but it is not real in the sense that it is something that it is fleeting. It has no inherent essence to it. It is just always moving, always changing. And when there is a world where everything is always moving and changing, and then we try to grasp onto that world, it's like we are grasping a dream. Does it make sense to grasp a dream? You wake up in the morning, the dream is gone. There's no point in grasping that dream. It is not real. In the same way, so many of the things that we experience in this world are not really real in the way we think they are real. They are fleeting moments, fleeting relationships, fleeting things that we have for a short time until nature comes and claims it back again. This is the reality of things. This is what I was saying at the beginning of the retreat, is trying to understand our attachments in this light. Yeah, when you understand your attachments in this light, you can see that, well, what about the attachments you had before, like 20, 30, 40 years ago? What about the attachments that you had in past lives? And you realize those attachments are irrelevant. Yeah, they don't matter anymore. They are gone once and for all. And they are, you wonder, were they really real? In the same way, in 10 years, in 20 years, in 30 years, in your next life, the attachments that you have now, today, are going to seem irrelevant. They're going to seem as if they weren't really real. So how are you relating to the attachments that you have right now? Are you relating to them as if they are like a temporary thing, a bit like a dream you have at night, and then it is all gone? Or are you relating to them as if they are more solid, as they are more real, as if they are something you can rely on, as if they are a refuge in your life? They can never be a refuge because they are far too temporary and far too uncertain. You used to see and hear those folk, call them by the name, yet the name is all that is left to tell of a person when they are gone. Yeah, people pass away. Don't attach too much. It's very difficult not to attach at all if you live an ordinary lay life and you have a family member. There's always going to be some degree of attachment, but remember not to overdo it, because if you overdo it, you're going to suffer a lot when eventually it comes to an end. It's better to be independent. It is better to be a master of your own destiny than actually be dependent on other people for your happiness. This is what this is saying. Those who are greedy for belongings don't give up sorrow, lamentation, and stinginess. That's why the sages, the seers of safety, left possessions behind and wandered. If you are greedy for belongings, then you have sorrow and lamentation for a large number of reasons. You have sorrow and lamentation because you have to hold on to it, you have to guard it, and because it is impermanent, because you know that ultimately you cannot hold on to it. One day it will be gone. So all the greed in the world is like a narrow thing. It's a small thing that only leads to pains and problems. And the other problem with greed is that it leaves, when you are greedy, it means that you are afraid of the rest of the world. Because the greed means that you are afraid that other people will take what is yours. Yeah, you are afraid of losing things. That's what greed means. And it means again that you are living in this small universe, this me against the world. That's what greed does. It kind of builds a wall around you. That's what greed does, and says, this is my world and you stay away. And the world becomes a fearful place. The world becomes a place that is out to get you, that is out to take advantage of you. This is what greed does. But if instead of being greedy, you are generous, then there is no fear anymore of losing your possessions. And when there is no fear, you become more embracing. It is no longer you against the world, but it is you are part of the world. You are embracing everything around you. And if someone steals from you, you shrug your shoulders and say, actually, it is not my problem. It is their problem. They are the fools because they stole. They will have to bear the consequences. I knew already that my possessions were impermanent. So for me, it is no issue. Expect the unexpected. Expect there to be burglars and things to sometimes steal from you. Those who are greedy for belongings, not only do they sorrow and lament, but they are stingy. Because this is what it means to be greedy. It means you are holding it for yourself. You're holding back. You're not sharing with the world. But stinginess, again, is a very painful state to be in. It is much better to be in a state where you are sharing with everyone, when your heart kind of opens up to the whole world and you just want to give with others and share with others. That you know that when you have that kind of feeling, you know it is a spiritual quality, a very powerful spiritual quality. Generosity is a beautiful quality. Stinginess is a sad, small, contained quality of you against the world, rather than being open to the world around you. When you understand these kind of things, then you are happy to leave all the possessions behind. And this is what the sages, the seers of real safety, the yoga kema is the safety here. If you want real safety, well, actually give it all up and practice something else instead. When you really understand how these possessions are problematic. Very powerful verses here and very meaningful. For a mendicant who lives withdrawn, sitting in a secluded places, they say it's fitting to not show themselves in a house. You're no longer interested in houses. You're no longer attached to those things. You don't go to hang out there. You just want to be in a secluded place. You don't want to be with families. You don't want to be busy with all kinds of things. You withdraw from all of that, sitting in a secluded place, withdrawn from the world. The sage is independent everywhere. They don't have likes and dislikes. Lamentation and stinginess slips off them like water from a leaf. You are independent everywhere. Wherever you go, because you don't have desires in the world doesn't have any pull on you. The world cannot pull you or manipulate you in any way anymore. Your happiness comes completely from inside. The world can do whatever it wants, and it doesn't affect you. That's why the sage is independent. Yeah, it's a beautiful state when no one in the world can manipulate you, when no one has the ability to draw you in one way or the other, because the strength comes from within. You have no likes or dislikes. This refers to the five sense world. Yeah, you have no likes and dislikes in that world. You are equanimous, you are even-minded, flowing through the world like a sage. The beautiful sages of the ancient literature, yeah, you become one of those. No lamentation, no stinginess. You are freely giving, open-hearted, open-handed, because that is the nature of being a sage, always giving. It's one of those things that I always like to point out to people, is that if you are ever going to make a decision, if you're ever going to have to decide whether someone is a Arya, a noble person or not, whether someone is practicing really well, how do you make those decisions? And one of the ways of seeing that is to see how giving someone is. Yeah, if someone is really giving, if someone is incredibly generous, the more generous they are, the more likely they are to be a Arya, a noble person. You cannot make any absolute judgment. Sometimes you find incredibly generous people who are not Aryas, but that is one of the qualities. If someone is stingy, guaranteed they're not an Arya. So look for the generosity, yeah? Look for the monastics or the lay people who are truly have the spirit of giving to the world without holding back at all. That is one of the signs of noble ones. It specifically says in the suttas, it is one of the qualities of the noble people that they are always generous. Without that generosity, it is in fact impossible to become a noble person. Like a droplet slips from a lotus leaf, like water from a lotus flower, the sage doesn't cling to that which is seen, heard, or thought. For the one who is cleansed does not conceive in terms of things seen, heard, or thought. They do not wish to be purified by another. They are acting neither for passion nor for dispassion. So the sage does not cling to that which is seen, heard, or thought. Yeah, there's nothing in the world that the sage clings to. There's nothing to hold on to the entire world, because holding on always means that there is attachment, and when there is attachment, there is suffering. So no holding on to anything, not just possessions, but also not to views. Don't hold on to views. You don't hold on to even your inner life, your inner five khandhas. Everything just flows. Now we're getting to the very deep dhammas at this particular point. You do not conceive in terms of things seen, heard, or thought. This is where it gets very profound again, because conceiving really means misunderstanding. It means thinking in the wrong way about the world. And when you conceive in terms of things seen, heard, or thought, what it actually means, it means that you have craving about these things. It means that you identify with these things. This is what I am. And you think of these things as yours. This is what is mine. Yeah. And you have views about them. And this is the idea of conceiving. It is a proliferation, a misunderstanding about the reality of the world. So now it gets incredibly profound. They do not wish to be purified by another, because these are the noble ones. They understand what the Dhamma is. They understand who the Buddha is. They don't look for purification outside of Buddhism, because they know that the Buddhist practice is true. They know that there is no other practice that is superior or has any deeper insight into the nature of reality. So you don't look elsewhere for teachings. This is another way that you can know whether someone is a noble one. Yeah, where do they find their inspiration? Is the word of the Buddha, is that what they really are inspired by, or are they inspired by other things? because the Buddha is the one who had the insight into non-self, who understood the idea of not conceiving in all these things. And because of this, you're acting neither for passion nor for dispassion. The idea here is that if you are acting for passion, it is like you are building up possessions in the world. You're building up the sense of self. This is who I am. This is passion. Yeah, it's the idea of craving, the idea of having a sense of identity. But also, you're not acting for dispassion, because if you're an arahant, if you have reached the end of the path, you don't have to practice anymore. The person who acts for dispassion are the people who are practicing the path. We're trying to give up the passions. But once you're an arahant, you can relax. Yeah, no more work to be done, no more passion to be carried out, no more dispassion to be reached. Finally, you can breathe, you can be at ease, you can relax. You have become an arahant. That is the idea of arahantship, all the way at the end of the path. Done what should be done. There's no further rebirth in this world, and you can finally breathe a sigh of relief. Next one, this is a sutta on sensual pleasures. And it is important to remember that when we talk about the idea of sensual pleasures, what we often mean by that are the things in the world, the things that we attach to in the world. Sometimes people think that sensual pleasure means the desire that people have inside of them. But very often it actually refers to the objects that we desire in the world, the things that we desire, the partner that we desire, the house that we desire, the car, whatever it is in the world. Yeah. So this is an important background here. So let's have a quick look at this. I will read through it first of all, and then we can make some comments afterwards. If a mortal desires sensual pleasures, sensual objects, and their desire succeeds, they definitely become elated, having got what they wanted. But for that person in the throes of pleasure, aroused by desire, if those pleasures fade, it hurts like an arrow's strike. One who, being mindful, avoids sensual pleasures, like sidestepping a snake's head, transcends attachment to the world. There are many objects of sensual desire: fields, lands and gold, cattle and horses, slaves and servants, women and relatives. When a man lusts over these, the weak overpower him and adversities crush him. Suffering follows him like the water in a leaky boat. That is why a person, ever mindful, should avoid sensual pleasures. Give them up and cross the flood as a bailed out boat reaches the far shore. So let's have a look at this. It's a very short poem, and it's quite easy to, we should go through it. So let's have a quick look at it. Yeah. So if a mortal desires sensual pleasures and their desire succeeds, they feel elated because they get what they want. And this is typical of humanity. We are going into the world. We are searching out the pleasures in the world. We get that partner we want. Yeah, we get that husband. We get that wife or boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever it is. Yay, I succeeded. Or we get the house that we want. Or we get the car that we want. We get the job that we want. We get the raise what we want, the promotion. We get the status in society that we desire. All of these things are kinds of sensual things. There are worldly things that we hold on to in the world. And when we desire, we feel elated, at least for a short time. Yeah, you feel elated for a short time, and then the ordinary life reasserts itself. And the whole thing kind of becomes empty very, very quickly. And then you need another raise. Then you need another promotion. Then you need another house, another car, more. always more, never being satisfied. And the reason why you are never satisfied is because the deep yearning from inside, the yearning to feel complete, the yearning to feel like a full person has not been satisfied. The hole inside is still there. And because the hole inside is still there, craving will come back again. It always comes back. The problem is that it is a psychological problem that we have. Yeah, every one of us, it's a psychological feeling of not being complete, of not being satisfied. And if you try to fill that psychological hole with external things, it can never fill that psychological hole. It can just maybe relieve you for a short time. You feel elated for a short time, but because it is a deep psychological lack, it will come back again. Craving will reassert itself, and you never find a solution in that way. Still, you feel elated for a while. And then the Buddha goes on, but for that person in the throes of pleasure, aroused by desire, if those pleasures fade, it hurts like an arrow's strike. Yeah, if you find a good partner in life, and then the partner leaves you, or they die, or whatever happens, yeah. If you find a nice house, but the house burns down, or the burglars steal the house, or they take the keys from your car, or they, whatever it is, you get fired from the company even though you have worked really, really hard. You haven't been lazy like some of these other people that were asked about in the question. You actually worked really hard, but you were not appreciated. And because you're not appreciated, you still get fired from that job. Maybe the people didn't like you. Who knows what the reason is? All of these things, the pleasures of the world fade. You were wealthy and then you lose all your money on the stock market. Happens all the time. What happens when these things occur? Well, then you feel the sense of pain that happens from losing the things that were very important to you. The downside of the sensual objects of the world become obvious. Yeah, the downside is that once you attach to these things, the more elated you are when you get them, the more problems you're going to have when they have to go again in the future. All of these things, remember what I said, they are borrowed things. You have them for a while and then you have to let go of them again in the future. You know it's going to be a problem. So the more elated you are when you get these things, the greater is going to be the downfall when eventually they have to go. All of these pleasures are like that. It's like being struck in the heart by an arrow. We were talking about the darts before. The Buddha says very interestingly that when we enjoy the sensual pleasures of the world, it is like we are taking up a loan. Yeah, when you take up a loan, you have to pay back the debt later on. This is the nature of sensual pleasures. Because once you attach to something in that sensory world, you know that sooner or later you're going to have to give it up. And because you're going to have to give it up, that is where the debt has to be paid back. So these are always problematic. There's never any certainty in the external world. And the more you understand that, the more you realize that the real freedom from all of those things has to be found inside. If you want to feel full, if you want to feel complete, if you want to fill up the lack within you, the hole that is inside of you, the part of your personality that doesn't feel complete, the way to do that is by inner development. When you develop your inner life in that right way, that is when you find real satisfaction. That thing that you were searching for through acquiring objects outside, that very thing you find not by gaining those objects, but by practicing the spiritual path. By practicing meditation, one day you do feel complete. You feel, wow, this is it. This is what I was always looking for. Now I've got it. What happened? Why was I so foolish and looking in the wrong place all the time? I was always looking in the wrong place. Now I have found it in a very different place by practicing the spiritual path. That's why the Buddha says, one, being mindful avoids sensual pleasures, like sidestepping a snake's head. They transcend the attachment to the world. It's hard to understand, isn't it? The idea that we should avoid attachment to the sensual pleasures of the world is like sidestepping a snake's head. It's hard to gain that understanding, isn't it? Because it does feel so benign. What's wrong with having a nice relationship? What's wrong with having a nice job? Actually, there's nothing wrong with those things at all. The problem with those things is the attachment that we have. Please have a good relationship. Please have a good job. Please have a nice house. Have all of those things. But beware of the attachment that comes with those things. When you see the downside, you sidestep that, like you sidestep a snake's head, because you understand the downside. So you transcend the attachment to the world. If you take this far enough, it ends up with what? It ends up with renouncing. It ends up with giving up the world and really becoming a monk or a nun, because you understand, actually, there isn't all that much to be had with these things at all. It's kind of powerful, isn't it? It is very hard for people to see. But it sort of starts to make sense when you read about these things. At least I hope it makes sense. I hope I'm not being a killjoy for pointing this out to you. Maybe I'm being a little bit of a killjoy, but maybe being a killjoy is a good thing. Maybe the Buddha was a little bit of a killjoy. But if you can kill a lower joy, and killing that lower joy allows you to access something higher, then it's worth it, right? So hopefully this is the path to accessing something higher. And if it is, then it is really worthwhile. The Buddha says there are many objects of sensual desire. Fields, lands, gold, cattle and horses, slaves and servants, women and relatives. These are all the objects of the world that kind of we desire. It says women here, of course. This is ancient India. You might as well put men in there as well. It's the same thing. It doesn't matter what it is. And when a person, not just a man, any person, lusts over these things, in other words, desires these things, then what happens? Then the weak overpower that person. The adversities crush him, and suffering follows him like water in a leaky boat. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? If you are overwhelmed by all of these things in the world, when you lust for all of these kind of things, when you desire all of these kind of things, you become weak. You're no longer independent in the world because you rely on external things. It means that the world has a way of manipulating you. The world can hold back, what you desire, and the world can give you a little bit to kind of whet your appetite for these things, and the world can control you. This is what we mean by Mara controlling people. The Mara has you in his grip, in his power. The Mara can drag you around because you are attached to the things of the world, and those things of the world are always out of control. You become weak inside. You don't have the strength to stand your ground. You don't have the independence in the world which you gain when you become a noble one, or your meditation is very deep, because you are addicted to the things of the world. And then the adversities crush you. The adversities here does not just mean like the kind of the enemies in the world, or the people who invade your country or whatever. The adversities here can mean anyone who wants to control you. They have you in their grip. They have a noose around your neck, and they can pull you around. This is what it means to be addicted to sensual pleasures. This is the problem. And because of that, suffering follows you like water in a leaky boat. If the boat is leaky, the water comes in, and then when you move the boat, then the water follows along, because the water is inside the boat. So the water in the leaky boat always follows along. In the same way, if you desire and you lust over all the things in the world, suffering always follows you along with you. You have to look after these things. You're afraid of losing them. You want to control them. And the more you try to control, the worse it gets, because you find that you cannot control it. And then you grieve when you lose it. And the kings, the taxman comes and takes his part. And the thieves of the world, they steal a bit from you, and the heirs who don't like you, they take their part, and it just endlessly goes on, and all kind of problems that arise over these things. And remember, this is what the Buddha saw. This is that beautiful story that you find in the Arya Pariyesana Sutta, the Noble Search. This is where the Buddha talks about what happened to him before he gave up the lay life, the home life. What did the Buddha do? Well, he said, well, here I am. I myself am subject to old age. I'm subject to dying and all of these kind of things. And when I am subject to dying, when I'm subject to old age, why should I cling to? Why should I desire all of these other things that also are subject to dying and old age and all of these things? It's crazy. I already have enough problems with myself. I'm going to die. I already have these attachments to myself, and then I go attached to other things as well. The Buddha called it the ignoble search. We are searching for other things that compound the problem, compound the situation we're already in. And of course, because this was the Buddha to be, this was the Bodhisattva, he's going to become the Buddha in the future. He thinks, I'm not going to go on this ignoble search. I'm going to go on the noble search itself instead. The noble search, find a freedom from death, a freedom from old age, a freedom from attaching to all of these unreliable things in the world. This is exactly what the Buddha to be was thinking when he was a bodhisattva, when he started out the path, the practice. So these again are very profound things. They can be very hard to see, and I don't know if you can relate to this, but it is worth investigating a little bit, because when you investigate these things a little bit, it means that your attention changes a little bit. Your mind is pointing in a slightly different direction. You become more interested in the spiritual life. And as you do that, less suffering is following along with you. Less suffering is coming in the foot tracks, coming in your footsteps, dragged along with you. Yeah, like the water in the leaky boat. And gradually, you're changing course in this way. So it is worth reflecting on, even if it is challenging. And then the Buddha says, that is why a person ever mindful should avoid sensual pleasures, should avoid the sensual objects in the world, give them up, cross the flood as a bailed out boat reaches the far shore. So if you are mindful, always mindful, you avoid those objects in the world. You avoid attaching to those things, because you know that once you attach to those things, you're asking for suffering. You say, please, please, may I suffer. That's what you say every time you attach to something. Do you really want that suffering? Or would you like to let go of it instead? This is the big question for our lives. So you give them up, and then you can cross the flood. The flood is the flood of samsaric existence. It is a flood because it is driven by craving, craving always flowing on. And because craving flowing on, we are driven like slaves to craving in this world, always working really hard, exerting ourselves. And then one day, when we give up the right thing, we can cross that flood of craving in the world. You can reach the far shore like the bailed out boat. There's no water inside. You're no longer carrying the suffering with you, and you're free of all of these problems that almost everyone else in the world has. So, this next sutta is very similar. It's a very similar kind of theme. It is about the downside of sensual pleasures. And I have already spoken about these things at quite a bit of length. But let's just quickly have a look at these things again. It's going to only a couple of similes here. The whole sutta has 7 similes, but I have chosen 2 of them, which are kind of the most useful for what we're talking about during this particular retreat. Let's have a quick look at this. This is from the famous Potalya Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 54. famous for me anyway. I'm not sure if it's famous for everyone else, but for me, it's really famous. Okay. Suppose a vulture or a crow or a hawk was to grab a lump of meat and fly away. Other vultures, crows, and hawks would keep chasing it, pecking and clawing. What do you think, householder, if that vulture, crow, or hawk doesn't quickly let go of that lump of meat? Wouldn't that result in death or deadly or death-like suffering for them? Yes, sir. In the same way, a noble disciple reflects. With a simile of the lump of meat, the Buddha has said that sensual pleasures give little gratification and much suffering and distress, and they are all the more full of drawbacks. Having truly seen this with right understanding, they reject equanimity based on diversity and develop only the equanimity based on unity, where all kinds of grasping to the world's material delights cease without anything left over. So this is one of my favorite similes, and I did sort of talk about this a little bit before, the same kind of ideas. I didn't mention the simile before, but I mentioned the ideas that are contained within this simile. So here is this idea. Yeah, you have a bird. It's a vulture, a crow, or a hawk. It doesn't matter what it is. And this bird gets hold of a lump of meat. And of course, a lump of meat is very valuable to a bird. It's very difficult for a bird to get hold of a lump of meat. Normally, they have to eat worms and they have to eat all kind of insects and all kind of yucky stuff. Yeah. So finally, you get hold of a lump of meat. And because you get hold of a lump of meat and you fly off, other birds will also want that lump of meat. So they come after that bird, they chase it, they peck and they claw, trying to grab hold of that lump of meat. Everybody wants the same lump of meat. Why? Because there is a shortage of meat in the world, especially for birds. It is a very rare thing to get hold of meat in the world. Yeah, and this is exactly what our human realm is like. There's a shortage of everything. Not everybody can live in a big mansion. Not everyone can have like 5 cars and 10 servants or whatever. Not everyone can have the most beautiful wife. There's only, or a beautiful husband. There's only so many beautiful people around. Not everyone can be the boss of the company. Not everyone can earn huge amounts of money. There is a limited resources in the world. And because there is limited resource in the world, we fight over these things. In the end, there is always competition. There's always winners and losers. There's always a sense of conflict in our society, and conflict arises out of the fact that the sensory realm is so limited. We are chasing the same things in this world. And this is what I was saying before. This is kind of such a downside of the sensory realm, that it is a realm that is always going to have conflict in it. It is built into the sensory realm. It is not something that can be escaped from in the sensory realm. Maybe we can reduce it a little bit by having good policies and good governments and these kind of things. But very often we have no power to decide the government anyway, so who knows what's going to happen? Yeah, it's kind of uncertain. But what we know, that even if we can reduce it a little bit, even if we can head in the right direction, there's always a reducible element of conflict and violence in any kind of sensory realm. And I don't know about you, but to me, this is such a powerful insight, yeah? Because it means that the whole sensory realm, in a very profound way, is very unsatisfactory. If it always leads to conflict, if it always leads to violence, if it leads to the invasion of Ukraine, if it leads to corruption and all of these crazy things that we have in our world everywhere, if we lead to people stealing the donations we give them because they are corrupt within the charity realm, if this is the nature of that world, then that world is much less interesting. The reason we think that there is hope in that world is we think that, well, actually, maybe the world will change. Maybe we can create a better world. And usually it is just hope. It's what they call the victory of hope over experience. Experience tells us this is not the way the world is going to be, but our hope, our desire, our craving, our attachments make us think that the world will be different. The world will not be different. The world will always be more of the same. If you look at human history, if you look at prehistory, if you go back to previous eons, just going by the suttas, it has always been the same. And it will always be the same in the future, because this is the nature of the sensory realm. It's a very profound insight. It turns you off that world. If it is so full of conflict, if that is an irreducible fact, an irreducible reality of that world, actually, it is no longer so interesting. It turns you gradually away from that world. It makes you far more interested in the spiritual realm, because in the spiritual realm, there is no such conflict. As I was saying before, the spiritual realm is always private. It is what is happening inside of you. You're building up good quality within. There's no conflict there. There's no competition inside of you. It is just you developing good qualities for yourself. And then when you come out of that spiritual development, you actually help create harmony in the world, because you have harmony inside of yourself. You have no need for those external things. So such a powerful way of thinking about the world. And I think it has this great ability to point you in the right direction. And if you don't let go, it says here, of that lump of meat, what does that bird get? Well, it gets death, or if it doesn't die, it gets death-like suffering, very profound suffering. In the same way, if we hold on to the things in the world, we can expect a lot of suffering as a consequence. So the Buddha says that with the simile of the meat, sensual pleasures are just like that. They give little gratification, but much suffering and distress, and they are full of drawbacks. Having truly seen this with the right understanding, you reject the equanimity based on diversity and develop only equanimity based on unity. What does that mean? Well, it means that the equanimity based on diversity is like the even mind in the world. You are still in the world, you're still living among sensory pleasures, because the sensory pleasures are always around us. Right now, I'm surrounded by a room, right here at Bodhinyana Monastery. There are lights in here, there's a window over there, a couple of doors. These are all sensory objects. We live in that world. We are immersed in that world. And even if you can develop an even mind within that world, the Buddha says that is not enough. You're still too close to the grasping in that world. So what you want to do is you want to develop a deeper kind of equanimity, the equanimity based on unity. And the equanimity based on unity is the equanimity of samadhi, the equanimity that you find in the jhana states, specifically the third and the fourth jhana. That is where you want to go, because then you go beyond the entire sensory world. That is kind of the idea here, because that is where all kinds of grasping to the world's material delights cease without any remainder. That is what the Buddha is saying. So I don't know about you, but I find this very powerful. It is so. And in a sense, we know it is true. This is exactly what the world is like. It has this problem. We're always competing over these things. In fact, we live in a political system, a political ideology. Most of the world lives within a capitalist system where we are competing with each other. Now, the downside of the capitalist system is that capitalism is based on the idea of competition. And whenever there is based on the idea of competition, because there are winners and losers, there will be conflict. And when there is conflict, eventually it will lead to violence and problems. And I think, to me, that is the problem with this capitalist system, that ultimately it has problems. I'm not saying that there is any better system. Maybe there is nothing better, but the problem is still there. I'm not here to advocate politics or anything like that. I'm just saying that whatever you do in the world, there are downsides. So let's have a quick look at the last simile, because this is one that I have talked about quite a bit already, so we can probably do it fairly quickly. Suppose a person was to see delightful parks, woods, meadows, and lotus ponds in a dream. But when they woke up from that dream, they couldn't see them anymore. Yeah, this is what happens in dreams. In the same way, a noble disciple reflects. With the simile of the dream, the Buddha has said that sensual pleasures, the sensual objects of the world, give little gratification and much suffering and distress. They are all the more full of drawbacks. Yeah, I've spoken about this simile before, but just in brief, there's different ways of thinking about these things. But one way of thinking about the simile of the dream is to think about when you think about a sensual object in your life, a relationship, a house or whatever, what it is like in the dream, what you think it will be like, and the reality of what it actually is. And if you contemplate that carefully, you will see that there is a big difference between the two. In the dream, the relationship is so wonderful, it is so great. Yeah. In reality, it is much more ordinary. Yeah? In the dream, the perfect house, well, it is perfect in the dream, but no house is perfect in reality, etc., etc., etc. In the end, you realize life has the same problem. And there's also other ways of thinking about the dream, and that was what I just mentioned before, earlier on in this verse, the idea that when a person has died and they are no longer there, it is almost like they have become a dream to you. You have woken up from that dream, the person is gone. It's almost like, were they ever there? It's like they have disappeared. Everything starts to fade away. It doesn't seem real anymore in quite the same way. All the attachments of the past tend to look a little bit like dreams when you look back upon them. So the Buddha says, in the same way as a dream, the sensual objects of the world, there's a lot of suffering involved with these things. Having truly seen this with right understanding, they reject the equanimity based on diversity and develop the equanimity based on unity, where all kinds of grasping to the world's material delights cease without anything left over.